Welcome back to the MOOC course on qualitative research methods. My name is Aradhana Malik and I'm helping you with this course, and we've discussed a lot of things about qualitative research. We've talked about what it is, we've talked about philosophical background, the paradigms, the strategies of inquiry, methods of data collection and analysis. Now we are going to move towards closure of this course. These are the last few sessions. So we'll start closing up the course, through these lectures. Today we will talk about interpretation. We'll talk about what interpretation is, how it can be performed, and or how it can be presented, and we'll also talk about a few new strategies of interpretation. So let's see what we have today. Okay, interpretation. What is interpretation? Interpretation is a clarification, explication, or explanation of the meaning of some phenomenon. And this is again from this book by Schwant and from the same book, the same dictionary of qualitative research terms. We have the reference is the same for both. Judgment is a considered, deliberate opinion based on good reason. So these two terms are many times used interchangeably. They're not interchangeable, but interpretation does lead to judgment. So when we interpret something, we clarify it in our minds, we explain it, we describe it in our minds, and then we form an opinion about it based on our interpretation of the phenomenon or series of events. So these two terms are linked and used very, very frequently in both qualitative and quantitative research. Characteristics of interpretation. Interpretation is subjective. Interpretation in qualitative research is subjective, it is contextual, it varies from how the researcher has situated the phenomenon within a particular context. It includes the contextual situatedness of the researcher and the researched. It includes the biases and the prejudices of the researcher. We've gone through this many times, so I'm not going to go into detail about it. It also includes the training and worldview of the researcher. We've also discussed this point in a previous class. So, how one is trained to carry out the research affects how one interprets what one has, the data one has collected and analyzed. How has one been trained to look at this data? How has one been trained to filter out the sense-making data from the data that does not make sense at that point in time, with reference to that particular context, but may be used later on to add to the knowledge that is created. So how does one divide up the data into meaningful data today and data that could be meaningful as a result of this interpretation tomorrow? So that all that depends on what one has been trained to look at, what one is really looking at in terms of publication. See, ultimately we are all researchers, and a very finite, tangible output of research is publication. It gives us numbers, it gives us something that we can hold and touch and measure and see how many people cite it in terms of finding it useful. So that is one tangible output. So how one interprets the data could also be influenced by where one intends to publish or how publishable the material, the interpretation could be. And all of these things, see, we need to be honest about these things. All of these things matter to a researcher. Now, we cannot be totally removed from what we are studying. We cannot be totally disconnected from what we are studying. Qualitative research says, yes, the researcher and researched have a relationship, and despite this relationship, or as a result of this relationship, something new, something unique emerges, or as a result of this relationship, the analysis is richer. So that is where qualitative research focuses. Okay, interpretation in terms of critical ethnography is likely to produce narratives about people in everyday and ordinary situations, and in doing so politicize the everyday world, illuminating the structures and processes that shape individuals' lives and their relations with others, which is likely to nurture civic transformation. So we are, when we talk about interpretation in terms of critical ethnography, ethnography carried out with a purpose to highlight the problems, the sources of oppression, the sources of the disconnect between or the sources of hierarchy in social situations, the sources of one community of people feeling uncomfortable and disadvantaged, and the other being perceived as privileged or more elite or advantaged class. So we these significant events, these significant phenomena, normal life, nobody wants to study normal life, very few, I shouldn't say nobody, very few people want to study normalcy because it doesn't yield anything. But we see these significant events, these significant phenomena that really attract our attention. And what critical ethnography does is, critical ethnography studies why this difference exists. We are attracted to it because there is a difference, and as researchers we also want to know why we are attracted to it. In addition to, why does this, why does this difference even exist, and why is this difference leading to one group of people feeling disadvantaged and one group of people feeling or being perceived as privileged, one group of people feeling oppressed and the other being perceived as the oppressors. Little bit of revision. We had talked about the art of interpretation when we just started talking about what qualitative research was, and we talked about interpretation being the last phase or the fifth phase in the process of qualitative research. We had talked about how interpretation takes place. So let's go through these steps. The researcher first creates a field text consisting of field notes and documents from the field, that is indexing and file work. Then the writer as interpreter moves from this text to a research text, which is notes and interpretations based on the field text. This text is then recreated as a working interpretive document that contains the writer's initial attempts to make sense out of what he or she has learned. And finally, the writer produces the public text that comes to the reader. The reader could be peers, the reader could be the general public. We'll talk about how policy, how social policy is connected to qualitative research in the upcoming lectures. We'll see how qualitative research can help social policy. So, we produce research documents, we produce papers, we produce monographs. We also, as qualitative researchers, produce documents that can stimulate public action. So we talked about public action research, we talked about participatory action research. So it can also, qualitative research can also stimulate, it can also provide an impetus to research that is going on, or it can provide an impetus to research that should be carried out to help solve problems of day-to-day life by really going into specific situations and seeing what these specific situations are and helping the people there. So that is what the ultimate output is. So we produce documents that can help or stimulate these discussions and actions. Okay. Impact of critical ethnography. What does critical ethnography do? We talked about civic transformations. Critical ethnography presents the status of day-to-day life with a stimulus for moral compassion and grounds for sound decision making, followed by a call to action. So when we talk about ethnography, we've discussed what ethnography is. We describe what is there. Then we write it up in such a way that it stimulates sound decision making and also brings to the fore, I won't say highlight, but brings to the fore the decisions that can be made to help the situation. And this then is followed by a call to action. So we say, okay, this is what it is, this is what can be, and this is how we can do it, so that what it is, so that the current situation can be improved. Okay. Critical ethnography also promotes interpretive works that raise public and private consciousness. These works help persons collectively work through decision-making process. They help isolate choices, core values, utilize expert and local systems of knowledge, and facilitate deliberative civic discourse. And so we produce works that can stimulate these decisions for social benefit. Critical ethnography also gives a chance to convey research findings to stakeholders through appropriate narratives. It encourages participative discourse among stakeholders and researchers. They talk to each other, they see what's going on, their life is described, it's taken back to them, our understanding is refined in light of what the stakeholders feel, and it promotes a form of textuality that turns citizens into readers and readers into persons who can take democratic action in the world. So it's, on the one hand, it provides an analysis of the current day-to-day situation with the feelings associated with that situation, situated with the observations situated within that context, so that the stakeholders can also relate to it. They can realize that the researcher is really keen on doing something to help their situation, and then it stimulates them, it motivates them to become people who can actually do something for their own situation. So that is the real goal of critical ethnography. Okay. Writing norms for an ethnographic writing project. Accuracy is one. We need to be absolutely accurate, correct. Interpretive sufficiency. Written accounts should possess depth, detail, emotionality, nuance and coherence. Non-maleficence, we should not have the intention to hurt anyone. The right to know, making one's moral position public. I am on this side because I support your cause, because I do not support this because. Honesty, the text must be realistic, concrete as to character, setting, atmosphere and dialogue. So it must be clear, crisp, accurate, honest, not written with the intention of hurting anyone, but written with the intention of just highlighting, bringing to the fore situations that can be resolved, bringing to the fore problems that can be solved to make everybody's life better. How do you perform ethnography? Challenges in performance ethnography is how to construct, perform and critically analyze performance texts. We had talked a little bit about performance texts in the past. Performance texts are texts that are written about the performances. So performed texts have narrators, drama, action, shifting points of view and make experience concrete, anchoring it in the here and now. It is understood that experience exists only in its representation. It does not stand outside the memory or perception. So the meanings of facts are always reconstituted in the telling as they are remembered and connected to the other events. We are talking about remembering something, we are talking about representing something as it is retained in our memory, as we have connected it to our drawing a parallels between a computer folder and our memory traces. We store whatever we see and hear in our memory, we tag it to something we already know, we store it in these folders that we have created in our memory. So it is understood that experience exists only in its representation. When we talk about experience, yes, we are feeling it, but then storing the experience is in terms of representing it, in terms of our ability to retrieve it from our memory and replay it, for want of a better word. So it is stored in our memory, and therefore it is influenced by the capacity and the categories, the capacity of our memory, the categories we have in our brain to hold this information, etc. So the meanings of facts are always reconstituted in the telling. I see, I hear, I experience something, but when I am telling it, it is laden with the emotions I experienced when experiencing it. It is laden with what I felt after the experience was over that helped me redefine what I experienced. Okay. So, the meanings of facts are always reconstituted in the telling as they are remembered and connected to other events. Why would we remember an event? Only when it would have some significant value for us. How many of us remember the people we saw while traveling from our place of stay to our place of work? Many times people just pass by. How many times do we remember how many stray dogs crossed our paths? Unless a stray dog comes in front of your car and you have to accidentally brake the car, and the dog just smiles at you and walks away wagging its tail, probably expressing his gratitude to you for not running over it. That would stick out in our memory. But stray dogs walk on the road all the time. How many of us would remember what breed of dog or what kind of stray dog crossed our paths when we were going from our home to the office in the morning? So, all of these things are stored in our memories for a particular reason. Then, and the emotion you experience, you may be a dog lover, but only when you see a stray dog about to come under your car and you have the opportunity to stop the car, bring your car to a screeching halt, and then see the gratitude in the dog's eyes and the dog's tail wagging, that the emotions are multiplied. You experience a different set of emotions at that point of time. You don't feel the same emotions when different types of stray dogs pass by. So, those emotions are then reflected in how you convey that experience. The writer narrating the ethnographic account recreates in the mind's eye a series of emotional moments. Life is then retraced through that moment, interpreting the past from the point of view of the present. We have discussed this ad nauseum in the context of reflexivity, so I am not going to go into the details. You just go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth between what we see now, what we've experienced in the past. We distance ourselves, we see things from the perspective of a researcher, go back into the situation, experience it, understand it, experience it, understand it. An aesthetic of color and critical race theory. A feminist or a member of a specific community or race or ethnic group. Now, the article by Denzin mentioned a lot of things, but I am not going to go into those specific details, just trying to be as neutral as possible. A member of a specific community, a race or ethnic group uses art, photography, music, dance, poetry, painting, theatre, cinema, performance, texts, autobiography, narrative, storytelling and poetic, dramatic language to create critical race consciousness, thereby tending the significant events in the history of the specific community, race, ethnic or cultural group into the future. So, these practices serve to implement critical race theory. We take whatever has been experienced by a specific cultural group, an ethnic group, a racial group, and we replay, we use various forms of expression to capture what is being experienced and to capture the significant events that highlight the uniqueness of these experiences. They are not day-to-day experiences, they highlight, and these experiences then sometimes they highlight the significant events in the history of, or these forms of expression highlight the significant events in the history of that race, culture, ethnic group, etc. And then we use those events captured through the expression of historical events, and we use them as basis for communicating what the specific culture or community or racial group would like things to be like in the future. So, we say this is what happened, this is how we have expressed what happened, and this is how we can change it, and this is how we express it we would like it to be. And we use these different art forms to project these things. Okay. So, that is another form of critical ethnography. Okay. Understandings that help create this critical race consciousness, and again all of this relates to interpretation. We interpret the past events experienced by a specific community, group, racial, ethnic group through the art forms we experience, we understand what is going on by a close observation of the art forms. Also, the art form also tells us what can be done to change that experience into a more pleasant one. Okay, or how would this community like these events or its perceptions about itself to be seen in the future. Okay, now ethics, aesthetics, political praxis and epistemology are joined. Every act of representation, artistic or research, is a political and ethical statement. This is what it is, this is what we would like it to be, and here is why. Claims to truth and knowledge are assessed in terms of multiple criteria, including asking if a text interrogates existing cultural, sexist and racial stereotypes, especially those connected to family, femininity, masculinity, marriage and intimacy. So, we want to know what is going on. Different texts are interrogated, and these are interrogated, and this is this relates to day-to-day life, significant events in day-to-day life. It gives primacy to concrete lived experience. It uses dialogue and an ethics of personal responsibility, values, beauty, spirituality and love of others. It implements an emancipatory agenda committed to equality, freedom, social justice and participatory democratic practices, and it emphasizes community, collective action, solidarity and group empowerment. Now, claims to truth and knowledge are assessed in terms of whether that text A captures what is going on, B describes what is going on in terms of why it is wrong, or explains what is going on in terms of why it is wrong, why it should be captured, why it is significant, and C, it provides directions for how the situation can be changed to enhance, to make the lives of those involved better. That is a simple, oversimplified explanation of what we just read through. Okay. The other understandings are no topic is taboo. Every topic is discussed in detail. It presumes an artist and social researcher who is a part of and a spokesperson for a local moral community, a community with its own symbolism, mythology and heroic figures. It asks that the writer artist draw upon the vernacular, folk and popular culture forms of representation, including proverbs, works, songs, etc. It includes a search for texts that speak to disadvantaged and vulnerable oppressed groups. It seeks artists and researchers, writers who produce works that speak to and represent the needs of the community. It is understood that no single representation or work can speak to the collective needs of the community. Rather, local communities are often divided along racial, ethnic, gender, residential, age and class lines. So, we use all of these forms of expression. One, no topic is taboo. Two, the social researcher is a part of that local community, is rooted in the local community, is situated there, feels the things that the local community is feeling, and then understands that the researcher can draw upon the various forms of expression that the community is engaging in. It includes a search for texts that talk about disadvantaged groups. It also tries to find out the representations of these disadvantages and representations of the needs of the community, and it also realizes that no single representation captures the entire gamut of experiences, entire gamut of the needs of the community, but still each text, each representation is unique and valuable in itself. What do these texts do? These texts are expected to be grounded in the distinctive styles, rhythms, idioms and personal identities of local folk and vernacular culture. These, as historical documents, these texts record the histories of injustices experienced by the members of oppressed groups. They show how members of local groups have struggled to find voices of dignity, find places of dignity and respect in a violent, racist, sexist civil society. These texts are sites of resistance. These texts tell you what life is like. They capture these moments, they make them revisitable. They are sites of resistance. They are places where meanings, politics and identities are negotiated. So the texts, the way these texts are written, provides an interpretation, or they are representations of how these meanings were created and how these created shared meanings can be used to change things in the future. Okay. So aesthetics and cinematic practices that inform and shape the narrative of texts documenting these practices. So how do these cinematic practices, these dramatic performing arts, these expressions shape the narrative of texts documenting these practices, these interpretations, the experiments with narrative forms, folk ballads, etc. Are some of the ways in which the narrative of texts is shaped. The use of improvisation, mise-en-scene and montage to fill the screen with multiracial images and to manipulate bicultural visual and linguistic codes, the use of personal testimonials, life stories, voiceovers and off-screen narration to provide overall narrative unity to texts, celebration of key elements in the culture under study, especially the themes of resistance, maintenance, affirmation and neo-indigenism, that is finding new ways of respecting old traditions or maintaining old beliefs, or mestizaje, Mexican word that means mixing ancestries, thereby challenging assimilation, melting pot narratives. So we celebrate how the culture is evolving. So all of these things shape the narratives of texts documenting these practices. Then rejection of essentializing approaches to identity and emphasis on a processual gendered performance view of self and the location of identity within, not outside of systems of cultural and media representation. So the essentializing approaches to identity are rejected, and there is an emphasis on a view of self that is constantly evolving. Refusal to accept the official race relations narrative of the culture, which privileges the ideology of assimilation while contending that the oppressed cultures had the capacity to and tried to resist the oppression. It is a given fact that oppressed cultures always had some elements that were trying to resist the oppression, and all that is reflected in and through these expressions. And that in turn adds to the interpretation of these significant events, that even though this was going on, something else was happening, and that too is captured. So everything needs to be captured in its entirety and presented. Okay. So all right, what purpose do these texts serve? Aesthetics, art, performance, history, culture and politics are thus intertwined for an artful interpretive production. Cultural heroes, heroines, mythic pasts and senses of moral community are created. It remains to chart the future, to return to the beginning, to reimagine the ways in which qualitative inquiry and interpretive ethnography can advance the agendas of radical democratic practice, to ask where these practices will take us next. So that is how these texts, we take these and then we go back and then we try and imagine how qualitative inquiry and interpretive ethnography can take these experiences and take these agendas of radical democratic practice and ask what and how our interpretations as qualitative researchers will shape these experiences in the future. Criteria critical ethnography must meet: it must evidence a mastery of literary craftsmanship, the art of good writing. It should present a well plotted, compelling but minimalist narrative. This narrative should be based on realistic, natural conversation with a focus on memorable, recognizable characters, which should be located in well described, unforgettable scenes. So one has to have a good grasp over the writing. The work should present clearly identifiable cultural and political issues, including injustices based on the structures and meanings of race, gender, class, etc. The work should articulate a politics of hope. It should criticize how things are and imagine how they could be different. It should do these things through direct and indirect symbolic rhetorical means, and researchers who write the above are expected to be fully immersed in the oppressions and injustices of their time. Researchers need to know what's going on. They need to feel the same thing that the members of the community at that point in time are feeling. They need to be able to understand things from the inside as insiders and from the outside as researchers, and they need to be able to master this dance of going back and forth between the researched and the researcher, and then present an overview of how things are and how they could be. So that is what critical ethnographers must do, and that is where we will stop today. That is, I know I've probably left you with some ideas that you may need to explore later, but I just wanted to take the discussion regarding interpretation a little further and give you food for thought. If you remember, right in the beginning of the course I told you that I need to leave you, my intention is to leave you with many more questions than you came here with. I need to leave you, I'm trying to leave you with a lot of questions, a lot of stimuli for further thought and a genuine quest for knowledge in this area. Thank you very much for listening.